Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Live Happily Ever Awesome. This is episode number 6, Avoidantly Attached with Julie Rappaport, your PACT certified couples therapist, the star of the show. Julie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Happy Wednesday. This is our
Yeah,
this is our
same.
new regular time, Wednesday at noon, 10 a.m. Mountain Time.
Yes, for the most part.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
we'll talk.
Barring. Yeah, we'll talk.
Sounds good. So last week we talked about anxious attachment styles and we
hmm
dug into that. And this week we are doing, I was calling it avoidance attachment, and you corrected me to a word that my computer does not like, doesn't think it's a real word.
Yeah,
So, avoidantly attached. Let's talk about it.
yeah. Um, yeah, so, avoidant avoidant attachment is kind of the other side of what's called insecurely attached. And what was I just completely lost my train of thought, but it'll pick back up. But it is, in pact terms,
Mhm.
we call them islands. So somebody who is more avoidantly attached is referenced as an island. And if you kind of picture an island unto itself, like just its own little thing. That's kind of the image of what the avoidantly attached individual is. It's very, they are very kind of isolated, more independent, highly independent, um, to almost to a fault. They see reliance on another person as weak, typically. Uh, they don't understand why somebody can't do it on their own. Um, as opposed to maybe the anxiously attached who's like, let's do it together. They're all about that. So when an avoidantly attached individual is paired with an anxiously attached individual, oftentimes, there's this uh, quick judgment of one another where the anxiously attached person is like, you're so selfish and self-centered, and the avoidantly attached person is, you're so needy, and you're just
Mhm.
you can't do anything on your own, kind of thing. And so that's kind of the basic rub that happens between those two. Now, people might say, well, why would that ever work? Why would an anxiously attached or a wave want to be with an island, or an island want to be with a wave? Wouldn't it be easier if just waves were with waves and islands were with islands? Yes and no. They all come with their own challenges, each structure. But the reason why islands and waves tend to gravitate towards one another is that the universe has, a sense of humor,
Mhm.
and we all are consciously or unconsciously trying to become whole in terms of, our journey here on this planet. What you believe in, religiously, has nothing to really do with it. It's just kind of evolutionary. And so unconsciously, the island looks at the wave and says, wow, they really, look out for others. They really um, are in tune with others. They're in tune with their emotions. These are all things that are challenging for me. And again, this is not conscious. Um, and so they seek those people out to kind of help them gravitate towards that direction, and vice versa with the wave to the island. They see them as extremely independent. They can do things on their own. They are very self reliant. These are things that are not easy for a wave. And so they are attracted to that. Now, when they get into relationship, those are the very things that bother the shit out of one another. So, there's a you know, an underbelly to it all.
Yeah.
Um, but getting back to the avoidant, the reason typically the one of the main reasons why they are the way they are is due to a kind of neglect, I would say. And neglect, there's a big N neglect and a little N neglect.
Mhm.
But neglect in terms of perhaps their parents were working all the time. Perhaps they just were vacationing all the time and kind of had a nanny there. Um, that the children didn't feel like attuned to, they weren't paid attention to. Lots of stories of, oh yeah, I played baseball growing up and my parents never made it to a game. Kind of those sorts of things. Or very a lot of times they're families where they come from families where emotions just aren't valued, aren't they just, it's kind of the stories would be, oh yeah, we did do emotion. My basic needs were provided for, but emotion, no way. um, and so what transpires with that a lot of times is islands, these kids tend to spend a lot of time alone. The stories of, oh yeah, I spent a lot of time alone outside, a lot of time alone in my room. um, and as a result, they become more what's called an auto-regulator, meaning in order to entertain themselves, because there's not a relationship to bond with and to throw the ball back and forth with, so to speak, they wind up entertaining themselves with, video games or reading or uh, anything that could be that they just that dissociates. They then go into their heads a lot. They have a very they tend to have a very rich imaginary world. um, and you can understand that given the fact that they're having to take care of themselves. They don't have a parental figure that's doing that for them, and so they become they're entertaining themselves in whatever way they can, and so they're reaching for these other things to help them kind of go into their own world, which is then very, it's dissociative, it's imaginary, it's um and it relaxes them. Now these are also kids that when they would get upset, parents would send them, say, go to your room. And so they really have to manage themselves. They learn that they don't get to relationally, they don't get it to co-regulate with their parent. The parent doesn't help them regulate themselves and talk about anything. They are pretty much, either overtly or covertly told to be quiet. We don't talk about that, and go to your room and deal with it. And so you can understand the extreme self-reliance as they grow up. You can understand the kind of what's seen in relationships as selfishness, as self-centeredness, because they had to worry about themselves because nobody else was.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
it's inherent that you become selfish or self-centered because that's how you survive.
So, and maybe I don't necessarily identify with this attachment style, so that's kind of why I'm not getting it. Because at first, when you mentioned, being very independent and things like that, I thought, oh, that's me, right? But then when you described sort of how you're raised and things, I certainly wasn't neglected, and you know, I don't know, maybe emotions were sort of not front and center with sharing with each other and things like that. But I wonder if and tell me, do people if that were me, I would think that I would crave sort of the other side of that and not necessarily be looking to be selfish, but I'd almost crave like having someone want to be emotional with me or want to take care of me because I was so tired of taking care of myself. Is that a phenomenon that can happen with those types of people?
So
Caller, hold
you
on
hit,
for a second, okay?
okay. You make a good point. It's this is how islands and waves are kind of drawn to one another as well, is that they can, this could be a similar sort of situation, similar with a wave where they're not attuned to, but the
Mhm.
wave handles it with always yearning for that, always wanting, like hoping that one day their parent will do this, that if they just do this or they just do that or they just, then maybe they'll finally get that, and so they crave it and crave it and crave it. And that's where the resentment comes in, is because they never got it. Now, islands cope in a different way. They might have the same scenario, but they are like, that's never going to happen. So I better just stop. I'm not even going to want it. I don't even want it
Mm.
because it's not going to happen. So they cope in a very, they just are self-protective. And then so they're not in touch with that at all. Once they get in touch with it through therapy and everything, then they're because they are also sensitive to rejection, because they and which of course goes into abandonment as well, but I would say they're more sensitive, whereas the wave is more sensitive to abandonment, an island is more sensitive to rejection, which also translates into abandonment, but it's a different flavor. And because they felt rejected as a kid, right?
Mhm.
So that's where but they are very much, okay, that's the way it is, and I'm moving on. Like, they do not dwell more in the past and wishing and hoping, and they are not oriented that way. They are more like, okay, that's that. We move on. We don't need to dwell in the past. We move on. We're very future oriented, whereas waves are really stuck in the past. Um, and they want to kind of resolve the past, go dig in the past, and they have a hard time moving forward. So it's, again, these are two different coping strategies of a similar wound, but then that's where they diverge. And so that's where they can tend in relationships to be like, foreign entities to one another.
Okay. You brought up an interesting point about the difference, rejection and abandonment. Can you dive into that a little bit more, the difference between the two?
Yeah. So if we just take it as like a wave versus an island, um, so the wave with the abandonment issue is, that's when they kind of become clingy or needy because they're so afraid of somebody leaving them. They finally have somebody there, and they don't want that to go. Now, inadvertently, of course, becoming extremely clingy and needy can
Push
be,
people away.
yeah, self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, it's a dynamic, because typically that's in relationship with an island who needs space and wants space, and also sees neediness as um, weak. And so, but the island has a huge, one of the main core wounds that they have, and emotion that they feel, is shame. It's kind of an internalization of, if parents aren't there, they don't, they're neglectful, they kind of feel like a piece of shit.
Mm.
And kind of believe that to their core. And this is, of course, a generalization. Not everybody does, but like, they're a piece of shit, or they're a fuck up. They can't do anything
These
right.
are, I'm sorry, these are islands or waves?
These are islands.
Islands, okay.
And so they feel rejected, right, from their parents. Like, there's
Mm.
something wrong with them that they were then not attuned to. And so that is a sensitivity that they have, is that keeps them in relationship, is they don't want to be rejected, which then of course is, if somebody leaves them, it's a form of abandonment, or sorry, a form of rejection, like there was something wrong with them that they left, kind of thing. So
If islands are fearing rejection too, do they sometimes put up with a lot more than they should to avoid rejection, perhaps? Or is that more of a wave behavior?
yeah, I mean, I would say toleration is, I think they both do that, but of course it looks differently. um islands islands just want to, they're trying their best to not do it wrong. And in other words, they're trying their best to get it right.
Yeah,
They
right.
just want to get it right. They just want to make their partner happy. They just want to, not be the fuck up, to, and not be get it wrong. And and so they will tolerate criticism. They will tolerate these complaints from their partner, um, all in the meantime hitting on their core wound of they're getting it wrong, right?
Sure.
um, in hopes that eventually they'll get it right. So in that sense, they will tolerate that, all with the kind of internal drive of, I'm going to get it right this time, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to, somehow, and therefore I'll be okay, kind of thing.
Okay. And then, so would it be more like waves then, that, like, who's the doormat, basically, is what I'm trying to get at?
I would say, I mean, it's a really good question. I would say outwardly would be the wave,
Okay.
inwardly would be the island.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the other thing that happens with islands, and this is something I didn't talk about with the anxiously attached or the waves, is because, and this is, I think, pretty important to understand, because the island was not raised with emotions, with a family who doesn't do emotions. If you think of, so then they become, I'll go back to that, but they think about, so these individuals, these islands, become what's called a low signaler.
Okay, explain that.
Meaning, you can't really read their face. You have, like, a lot of times, people that are in relationship with an island, they will be like, I cannot read them. I have no idea what they're thinking, feeling, because oftentimes there's just a blankness to their face. Whereas waves tend to be what's called a high signaler, where you could, I mean, it's obvious what they're thinking, feeling, kind of thing. They're just very easy to read. And so with that, you have to understand that the brain has a negative bias, meaning if there is no input of information, if people aren't saying things, if people aren't expressing things, if it's blank, neutral is actually negative.
Hmm.
So that's something that we work on with islands, is helping them and helping their partner help them to move their face, because the last thing they want is their partner thinking something negative, because then it could come across as criticism or judgment, or which is the very thing they hate the most. So it's better for them, if they're not feeling unhappy in any way, to be overly exaggerative with their face,
Hmm.
um, so that their partner doesn't go to a negative place, because they will. They also aren't very communicative. Because they've tended to go inside. They don't need to talk. They don't need to process anything. And so their partner also is left going, I don't know you. And they, with lack of information, they go to negative. They assume, their partners assume negative. And so it's better to share. If you're not feeling negatively, it's better to share, which will feel like oversharing, to
Mhm.
them.
Mm.
But I advise them to overshare, because their overshare is never going to be an overshare. It just never will be. They just aren't oriented that way. It'll just be sharing, right? So,
I have an
but
analogy. I have an analogy for that. It's when you're coaching someone in Olympic lifting and they can't get triple extension and you tell them to jump, right? And it's like, they're not actually gonna get their feet off the ground necessarily. Like the person in the corner that's already doing it right now is exaggerating it. You don't want them
right,
to listen to you. But the
right,
person that's not getting their feet off the ground, it's like, damn it, just jump.
just jump, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's, it's unfamiliar and weird and awkward, and so, but it's in their best interest to be uh as expressive as possible and as communicative as possible, because it will prevent their partner from going into negativity.
That negative space. So
And
no news is not good news for these people, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
yes. And their partner, if they're with a wave, is already oriented towards negativity, so they
Just
really need to,
exacerbates the problem.
exactly. um And there was one other piece I was going to say about them. Oh, the reason why they have these more still faces, or they're low signaling, is it's this just makes my heart break, that all children, they just that we all, they're just naturally expressive. We just are, until we're kind of trained not to be.
Mhm.
So, imagine this kid who's into, expressing an emotion, whether it's anger, sadness, upset of some sort, and they're in their parent, they're expressing it, and it's more of a higher signaling system, but their parent looks at it and says, "No, we don't do that," or, "Boys don't cry," or, something like that.
Shuts it down. Yeah. Somebody shuts it
Shuts it
down.
down or just completely ignores it, right?
Mm.
So the kid, that is, I mean, excruciatingly painful. And so the island copes with that by saying, I just won't, if I don't show anything, then there's nothing for them to miss. And then I don't have to experience the pain.
Yeah,
And so
that's
I'll just shut down everything, so that then I don't feel the pain. They're not missing anything. It's just the way it is. And so that's kind of a microcosm of how islands function and cope with things is, we just shut it down and just move on.
yeah. Does it ever get to a point where, I mean, what happens when is it similar to when people sort of shove emotion down? Are they gonna is there a volcano on that island?
Yes, they are. They can tend towards rage,
Mhm.
um, but oftentimes they really aren't in there. I mean, these individuals are actually can tend to be really sensitive people and sweet, and you just wouldn't know it, because it's so shut, they're so cut off from that, because they had to be,
Yeah.
that once you start doing some work in sessions, it's like, and you can encourage them to start getting in touch with that, as well as if they're doing individual work, that really is helpful too. um the plethora of emotions and sensitivity that are there, it just is, I mean, it's extremely heartwarming and tender, and it fills them out as a person once they
Mm.
are able to do that.
Yeah. So what are some things that, avoidantly attached people should consider or think about to set themselves up for healthier relationships just in general?
Well, I think that the thing is that I think islands might have a little bit of a harder time, in terms of being in a relationship, because of the fact that they're oriented as a one person system. That's
Mhm.
how they grew up. They had to be. And so, it's ironic then that they get into a relationship. There's something in their system that's wanting that intimacy, connection,
Mhm.
but their orientation does not set them up for success with that. They default to, I take care of me, you take care of you, we'll be good. Right. And that is really just kind of you're living parallel lives kind of thing.
Sure.
Or they like to be king kind of thing, where I take care of me and you take care of me.
Mhm.
Um, and then, of course, that sets up for an unfair relationship, and they get really, um, especially if they're with a wave, that's not going to go well at all. If an island is with another island, uh, that could work really well.
Sure.
However, then they are on their own islands and trying to figure out their issue. Then would be to figure out how do we even create intimacy, connection. They kind of yearn for that. There can be an emptiness on that level. So wherever you go, there you are, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say that they have to start challenging their thinking in terms of, oh, I do want to say just one caveat is that islands can also exist due to an over involved parent,
Mm. Okay.
which is a little bit, kind of counterintuitive. But an over involved parent is just, in their face, always, kind of that helicopter parent. And sometimes these kids feel like they're just like, get out. Like there is nothing of me. You are taking of me,
Mhm.
and there's nothing left of me. And so they then kind of distance themselves and just become hyper independent because of that. Now, that then translates into their fear of intimacy,
Okay.
um, because they fear that if they attach and somebody is relying on them for any reason, there's going to be nothing left of them. That
Mm.
other person is just going to take, like,
Like, suck them
I
dry like their parent did.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so they have a real fear of being engulfed.
Mm.
And even if that didn't happen as if their parent wasn't overly intrusive or enmeshed, they still have that fear of being engulfed because their sense of self is so important to survival, right? Because they're such a singular system that if somebody is relying on them, they will just take, um, and they won't exist anymore. And so it really is like an existential crisis that they get into.
Yeah. What, how do islands parent?
Yeah. Um, so without
Typically,
not, yeah,
stereotypically, how do they parent?
without awareness of it, they would be more on the neglectful side. They would be more on the um, let them do what they want to do. Oh, my kid is fine. The reason that also the thing that kind of, sorry, I'm kind of bouncing all around, but
Oh, we're following.
the thing that kind of creates an island, right? If an island is parenting an island, um, that's likely to create, or parenting a child is likely to create an island, because they
Mm.
are coming from the perspective of, you're just fine the way, you're fine, you can take care of it yourself. uh, you don't you don't need me, and if you do, you're weak, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so, these what happens is you'll often hear a parent say, yeah, I mean, he's such an easy kid, he's just so easy. And oftentimes that's a red flag for me to think, oh, perhaps you're not
You're not paying
attuning
attention.
to him,
Right.
because these kids
They're
are easy because, oh, you might, There you are. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Was it you?
I hear you, but I don't.
Hate
You're frozen.
technology.
I know. I can hear you, but you're. Oh, now you're back. Now you're back. Can you hear me?
Kind of. All right.
Testing.
I'm
Test.
back.
You're back.
Are you back?
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
You've been back. I'm all
Yeah.
messed up. Hold on.
Cat's router got hot.
Oh, I hear the cat.
Yeah. Wants her.
Yeah, my router got hot. Whatever. This is great. All right, we're good. Sorry.
Okay.
We were talking
Yeah.
about I said
But
kids aren't
kids.
easy. You said that's a red flag sometimes when a parent says, "Oh, the child's so easy." It's maybe that they're not paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, these kids learn that if they're not being tended to, they just take care of themselves. They're fine, right?
Mhm.
They're just fine. And so they don't bother their parents with things. They don't and so the parents, oftentimes are like, "Oh, they're good. They're so easy." And it's like, if you really checked in with them of what's going on, they might have some things that they need help with or what have you. But going back to, yeah, what islands need to do is really start to focus on what it means to be a team and a good team player.
Okay.
That we come into this world needy. We've talked about this. We are not fully developed when we come into this world. We all have needs, all of us, and so to depend on another person is natural. It's not weak. But they have been programmed to think that. So kind of challenging that thinking, that they actually, if they really think about it, I mean, they could fulfill all of their own needs. They probably could. We probably all could, but we are
Yeah,
going
it's
to
not fun.
burn our resources. We are going to burn ourselves out. We are going to then we have a lot of what's called allostatic load, meaning you're burning up resources, which then creates other hosts of problems like heart attacks, high blood pressure, high
Mm.
cholesterol, just, autoimmune disorders, just these things that it will take so much, burn so many resources that the other things will then begin to fall apart. And people don't put it together that, oh, they have high blood pressure. It's because they are so self-reliant that they think depending on another person is weak. Um, but there's a correlation.
Yeah. But you could be a workaholic and not be an island, right? Maybe.
Hmm. Um, yes and no. Would say that it tends to be that most aholics
Mm.
are islands. Most.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit. That's interesting. Why do you say that?
Well, they get a lot of sense of self worth from these other things. Like work. If they're successful in work, then they're not a fuck up, right?
Mm.
So it is, they then dive into that so that they can try to be successful. So then they can have that sense of self worth, which mitigates the shame that they feel.
Mm. Okay.
Now, the other thing is that these, what we talked about, the auto regulatory systems like video games, um, just computers, or,
Crossword puzzles.
yeah, I mean, like any social media, that is just like a rabbit hole for islands, especially. But I mean, all of us, but for them especially. But they then, there's a tendency towards escapism, right? So not only is the work a way that they can mitigate their shame, it's also a way to escape. Same with drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, all of these, addiction type behaviors are ways to escape. And so, because they have more of a propensity towards that because of their imprinting from childhood, that's why we tend to see them as islands, more as aholics.
I think your mic just died on you.
Hmm. Can you hear me?
Nope.
Darn it. All right, let me
It was
unplug it.
staticky while you were explaining that, but I thought maybe there's a bad connection potentially.
All
Good.
right.
See, I'm not the only one that messes this stuff up today.
Gosh darn it. Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
Now you're muted. You gotta you have to, nope, cannot. Oh, you guys can hear her? I can't hear her. Shit,
Oh,
it's me.
it's you. Ha ha.
Well, that's awesome. Well, let's try to have a conversation. I can read lips maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Guys, I'm such a failure. Let's see here.
No, you're not. The technology is.
I'm read. These damn new
Scott, can you help out, Scott?
new headphones. Try now.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can't hear you still. All right. Well, this has been great. As long as everyone can hear me. You can hear me, right? Oh, maybe.
I can hear you. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Not a failure. Thank you. In the chat. All right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to take this away and close out the show. We're here next week. We need topics. I would like to understand. I think there's 2 more attachment styles that aren't avoidantly or anxious attachments, and I'd love to know more about those. If you guys want to hear about them, maybe we can dig into that. There's a plethora of subjects that we, could spend a lot of time on. Someone was talking about the 5 love languages last time, and whatever else. And Julie, if you have any parting words, you can say them now. I won't be able to hear you, but the listeners will, and then I will shut us down for the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
give me the high five, and I'll go.
What is one thing an avoidantly attached person can do to improve their relationships? Yeah, I would say, that focusing on their partner, if they're with a wave, probably the best thing to do is learn how to make that person feel important. So whether it is, they know their love language is acts of service. So then maybe doing little acts of service, or even just piping in like, you matter so much to me. You are so important to me. Those things, even though they sound, weird, go a long way. So if they can make their partner feel like they matter, that will be, they will reap the benefits of that. Good therapy is a good way to go too. Does anyone have any other questions before we close out? Just, you could put them in the chat, or you could yeah. So I think Jody being able to figure out what his love language is would be helpful for you. If he, oftentimes it's acts of service, or little things like, little notes, Like you could leave him a little note on his car that says, have a good day, or thinking of you, or a text that says, thinking of you throughout the day, just so he feels like you're thinking of him. He matters to you. He's important. You couldn't just go about your life without him. So I think that would go a long way. Anyway, so if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, just wondering what you all would want to hear about. Any future topics that you're interested in. I can always come up with some, but just want to cater to you guys if you have any burning topics that you'd like. So.
Are we done?
Yeah.
Okay. Guys, thanks for hanging out. We'll fix this eventually.